Hey friends, looking for some great business content other than right here on Accelerate? Then check out C-Suite TV and watch in-depth interviews with business content for C-suite leaders and entrepreneurs, including an interview with me, your favorite podcast host. And it's all on demand. Watch and get insider secrets on demand by going to csuitetv.com. That's c-suitetv.com. Business insights on demand. Okay, let's do the show. It's time to accelerate. Hey friends, this is Andy. Welcome to episode 482 of Accelerate, the sales podcast of record, where I hold in-depth conversations with today's leading experts in sales, marketing, and leadership 6 days a week. So we're closing in fast on episode 500. You'll want to stay tuned. We're going to have a lot of fun with that episode. So if you like Accelerate, then it really help us out if you take a minute, subscribed to the show, left us a review. We're trying to do all we can to make this a valuable experience for you. So if you get a second, you're listening on your phone, pause, subscribe, use the podcast app on your phone to subscribe, leave a quick review or Accelerate, and then come right back. So joining me on the show today is Kelly Riggs. He's one of my favorite people in this business. Kelly is the creator of The Business Locker Room. He's an author, a speaker, a podcaster. Wrote a book with one of my all-time favorite titles called Quit Whining and Start Selling. Now he started a new venture with his son, Robbie, called Countermentors. It's all about teaching leaders and professionals how to survive and thrive in the 4-generation workplace. Now think about that, 4 generations in the workplace at one time. Well, let's jump right into it. Kelly Riggs, welcome back to Accelerate.
Wow, great to be with you, Andy. Thanks so much.
Well, my pleasure. It's been so long. I mean, you were one of my first guests, in the grand scheme of things. So
Actually, we should tell the audience, you were first a guest of mine, and I didn't do anything that scared you off, so you invited me to be on your show.
That's right. No, it was a great experience. And I always remember you with this, radio voice.
Oh, well, thanks.
So didn't you do radio at some point in the past?
I did.
Right.
Many moons ago, I was a partner and I co-owned a sports media production company. And as a matter of course, they said, you should have a radio show. We were doing like scoreboard shows and all kinds of things. And so I did. I wound up hosting a sports radio talk show and just absolutely had a blast with it. Had a blast. Really enjoyed it.
And based in Oklahoma, where you are?
It was, yes. We were on a Cox station here, a big AM station. And in fact, it was on Saturday nights, Andy. And the interesting thing about it is AM radio on Saturday nights back in 2001-ish, I think they were number 13 on the book. And within 2 quarters, I think we'd gone to number 1 because, we just invited great guests. It's the whole secret, right? To get great guests, ask some questions, get out of the way. And we went to number 1 in a couple of books. So it was a lot of fun. There's a lot of sports enthusiasm here. It's all based around college, not so much.
Yeah, I was going to say Tulsa and OU and OSU.
Yeah, even back then we didn't have the Oklahoma City Thunder, but you have people that are Cowboy fans, Dallas Cowboys and Kansas City Chiefs, but it was basically driven by the Sooners and the Cowboys of Stillwater, so of OSU. So it was good. It was good fun.
Not the what's Tulsa, the Golden Hurricanes or something?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Golden Hurricane. Well done.
Golden Hurricanes. Now, what the hell is a Golden Hurricane?
Could not even begin to tell you. And why it's a mascot in landlocked Oklahoma. No idea.
I could have understood, dirty tornado or something like that. But
absolutely. Yeah, we do a tornado or two, unfortunately, here. Sometimes quite badly, but it makes more sense.
The big news for Oklahoma, you guys are the seismic capital of the United States now. It used to be California. You always had to worry about earthquakes, but now it's Oklahoma.
Well, tornadoes weren't enough. We needed more natural disasters, so we just decided to add earthquakes to the menu. Now you can just kind of dial up what you want.
Yeah, excellent. So how often do you feel like a trembler?
I've only actually felt a couple, and it was bizarre. We were actually doing some remodeling in our home. We have a 2-story, and because they were working downstairs, my wife and I were sleeping in the bedroom upstairs, and we woke up one Saturday morning, and it felt like a train and a squadron of B-52 bombers was going by, and the whole house was shaking.
Wow.
I'm like, holy cow, what is that? And, because I'd never been in an earthquake and had no idea. And my wife's like, I think that's an earthquake. And man, it was scary. I mean, it was freaky.
Yeah.
It really was. So, but just a couple of times, enough that we could feel it.
Yeah, at least with tornadoes, you can feel like you can go somewhere, right? You can go in the basement, go in the shelter.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it is a cottage industry in Oklahoma for storm shelters, and rightfully so. I mean, it's scary stuff.
Yeah, that was very scary. All right. So first thing I want to talk about is you've got a new venture, and we're going to talk about some sales stuff in a bit.
Yes,
but
sure.
For part of our audience, we've got our audience works in sales. We work in companies. We work in multi-generational workplaces. And so you've got a new venture, Counter Mentors, where you're really sort of talking about this issue.
Yeah, quite a bit. It's really interesting how we came at it. I work with my son. We work together. And he and I have enjoyed what we coined the term counter-mentor relationship, where I mentored him through high school and college. But once he got out into the workplace, and he's a consultant in his own right, has his own shop. But he was always coming to me with ideas and thoughts. And of course, the millennials, of which he is one, Andy, they bring a tremendous amount of value to the workplace because of technology and community and social and all those things. And so many times, rather than try to figure it out on my own, I would just, get it from him. So we began to talk about it a lot. And when I started doing what I'm doing now a dozen years ago, some of the first engagements I had were from companies saying we're really challenged in leading and managing effectively with millennials. I mean, we're just so different. And the perspectives are all over the board, and we don't get it. You know how boomers are. These millennials, wow. And so many times I would go in and do training around that. Well, Robbie, my son, he experienced it on the other end. He was getting the how old are you and what kind of idea is that? And, oh, look, we've never done it that way here. And, all that routine.
Yeah, listen, son, that's not the way we do it around here.
Yeah, well, it's not the way we do it here, pal. So anyway, we began to talk about this stuff, and we recognized that a lot of the things we were seeing from two different perspectives, we had the same sort of ideas about. And we developed a methodology for training boomer leaders and millennial employees. And of course, now you have millennials who are in leadership positions as well, but getting them all to understand how you can create an environment where both generations can thrive. You can leverage the skills and wisdom of each, and you can really do something phenomenal with this. And it was just groundbreaking. I mean, immediately people began to say, hey, you need to come and talk to us. And I really found it to be extraordinarily valuable in sales, Candy, because I know you know as well as I do, managing the millennial salesperson, the same kinds of challenges, but they're now being introduced to all of the things like social selling and social media and technology and tools and apps and everything. And if you can't stay with the program at our age in order to manage them effectively, then you're going to lose them, and you're going to have a big challenge attracting that high-powered millennial sales talent that is the future of the company.
Yeah, well, future of the economy. So you talk about the 4-generation workplace. So I was sort of stuck at 3: a Boomer, Gen X, the unfortunate group in the middle there, millennials, and
I tell you,
Gen. Are you talking about Gen Z now?
Gen Z would be 4, and actually, but they're just coming online. They're just beginning to enter the workforce at around the age of 18, 19, 20. But it's really interesting. In some places, you'll actually find 5 generations, because you still find some of our parents still working in their late 70s and sometimes early 80s in that same workplace. So on the rare occasion, it can actually bump up to 5 generations.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So I was just trying to think about that. Some people are obviously being forced to work longer. Right. I mean,
yes,
this changes in the economy and retirement, the cost of living's gone up and so on. So, yeah, people are definitely not just boomers, but even whatever that generation is before, the ones that were too young to be our parents, but too old to be boomers.
Yes, I think typically they're called the silent generation.
Oh, really? The silent generation. Okay. So I guess one thing that's really sort of interesting to think about is, what do Gen Z think about millennials?
Well, it's interesting because they are different. A gentleman by the name of Tom Kalopoulos wrote a book called The Gen Z Effect. And one of the interesting things about them is they have actually grown up in the 2008 economic downturn. And so there's some economic security issues that they really care about. They're much more entrepreneurial than their millennial brethren. They tend to be
more entrepreneurial?
Yeah, in the sense that they want to work on their own. They don't want to have any dependency. They grew up seeing what can happen when you lose your life savings and companies go broke and those kinds of things. So they share their millennial brethren's background. I mean, clearly they are digital natives, and I like to say they not only grew up with technology, they come out of the womb tweeting about it. So well, I mean, they hit the ground running.
Well, they really are the first generation to be completely digital. Yeah, absolutely,
100%. And it's really interesting because they bring a little bit of different flavor to the workplace, but they're just getting there. So I mean, they're very, very, very young in that process, but they're going to change the workplace now. What happened in terms of workplace dynamics is a little over a year ago, the millennials became the most populated part of the workforce. They they're the majority. So right. You and I, we're out. All right. Hey. And of course, boomers are.
Talk for yourself.
Boomers are retiring en masse. I tell you who's forgotten in all of this is nobody talks about Gen X.
Well, that's why I called them the middle. They have sort of the middle child syndrome here. Is that they sort of get overlooked. They're not the boomers like the oldest child. The millennials are like the youngest child. Middle child syndrome, sort of overlooked.
There's no doubt about that, and it's interesting that. My son and I, of course, we do a video podcast together, as you know, and he loves to put it all on me. He's like, Dad, you boomers are always talking about how bad we are. We're the trophy generation. We're the snowflakes and the cupcakes, and we're entitled and all this kind of thing. But he said, who raised us that way? Yeah, so it's very hard to get away from. It's either the boomers or the early Gen X's that raised these kids as quote unquote helicopter parents to be the way they are. And we did not allow them to fail. And we gave them every opportunity to, walk around the barriers instead of having to climb over it or whatever the case may be. So
Simon Sinek. Have you seen Simon Sinek's video? He has got a video talking about this.
100%.
Yeah, it's a great video.
Absolutely. I love his whole shtick when he talks about, it's the wrong word to use, but I love his whole explanation when he says is that kids today don't actually have to develop interpersonal skills because they do everything on apps, right? So they don't have to say yes when they mean no and no when they mean yes. And if they don't like someone, they just swipe left. And if they like them, they swipe right. Mm-hmm. I just think that's so funny. So, and then they get into the workplace and they have to learn to interact with a generation that's, mostly in charge and boomers. And the perspectives are so different, their values are different, and yet they intersect in some very, very interesting ways. And once you understand those things, you can really make some terrific strides in creating that incredible high performance workplace that we all care about.
All right. So what are some of those points of intersection?
Well, to Robbie and I, one of the keys are, and the things that we saw over and over and over, is both generations, boomer and millennial, talk a lot about the idea of respect. They both want respect, but they see it completely different. My dad's generation that I grew up, he being raised by, you did not ask your dad why, because that was disrespectful. You just did what you were told. You kept your mouth shut and did what you were told. Mm-hmm. You respected people because of their position, their authority, their title. The teacher, the coach, the policeman. You did not question those people. They demanded your respect because of who they were.
Or expected it, for sure, yeah.
Absolutely. And today's millennial is, I will respect you once you earn it. They really care about respect. So they'll come into a workplace where they've been interviewed, recruited, hired, and they're now being paid, but their thought process is, well, I'm going to wait and see if my boss deserves my respect. And so if they don't treat me with respect, I will not respect them. Well, that's completely ridiculous to a boomer. It's like, listen, son, cupcake, we hired you, and because I'm the boss and you're not, then I expect you to respect me. And they just laugh. It's like, I don't think so. So if you can get on the same page that we both value respect, and if we can set some really simple ground rules in the beginning that says, look, you deserve the respect and I am going to respect you and treat you with respect, but because I am the boss, I expect the same in return. The interesting conversation with the millennial is, why do you deserve to be respected from the get-go, but the boss doesn't? And when you ask it that way, they think, well, I've never really thought about that. And the reason is some of these generalizations or generalities are true because they're easily observable. And so many of the millennials have grown up sort of self-absorbed, self-contained. I mean, they're the most highly connected generation there is, but the most socially isolated because they're doing it all over the internet, right? Or vast majority of it. So they really don't have that sense. So once you open their eyes a little bit and say, no, wait a minute, if you deserve to be respected from the beginning, why doesn't your boss deserve to be respected from the beginning? Wouldn't that be a good place to start? And I will say rational millennials will say, yeah, that makes sense. So we can do that.
Well, okay. So what about the irrational ones?
Well, I don't do irrational.
Well, no, it's
the irrational ones. I think it's like anything. When we're teaching leadership at a basic level, Andy, and someone comes into your culture and you're interviewing them, I think it's incumbent upon the leader to explain who we are, the way we do things, the kind of people we are, and what the expectations are going to be. And if you don't like those or don't want to be a part of them, hey, no harm, no foul, no judgment. We just can't use you here. Okay. I mean, we just want to create a good fit. So I think another one of those great intersections is making sure that you both identify with the same expectations, they're aligned, and you're willing to live by those expectations. And an irrational person will just say, no, thank you. And that's okay, actually.
Well, I mean, I guess I was getting to is there difficulty on the part, let's say, of a boomer or a Gen X manager who's interviewing a millennial to really express what their expectations are in terms that are understood the same way they're being expressed?
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, the difference is the perceptions of the world and what we think is important. Here's a really good example. Many millennials don't understand why do I have to be in the office at 8 o'clock sitting in my chair? I can do more work at Starbucks between 7:30 and 8:30 than you can get done in half a day, right? I mean, it's kind of their thought process. But if the boss says, listen, here's the deal. We really want to create an atmosphere where people are here. And here's why. We have customers calling and we have this camaraderie or, whatever the why is behind why we do things. Millennials are okay with that. What they're not okay with is, look, just sit down and do what you're told. Don't question. It's not, it's above your pay grade. Just be here. They're not going to tolerate that. And when we're training millennials, or training boomer leaders, rather, we're telling them that, listen, millennials are okay with things that you do that they don't agree with if they understand the perspective and why you're doing them and what your thought process is. I mean, nobody agrees with everybody 100% of the time, no matter what your generation is. In fact, leading millennials effectively is not any different than leading any generation. I mean, it's nuts. It'd be like saying you gotta lead women completely different. No, you don't. You just have to be an effective leader. Whoa, you have to lead Hispanics differently. No, you don't. You just have to be a good leader and understand what it takes. And I tell you, one of the challenges is so many times in the workplace, we allow people to do generalizations and biases against generations that we would never accept in any other terminology. A really good example is my son and I were working with an engineering firm, and the CEO, who happened to be a female, several times said, well, these millennials this and these millennials that. And she'd had a couple of experiences with like two millennials that didn't go very well. Right. And finally I said, let me ask you a question. Would you be completely comfortable with substituting the word female for millennial? And she said, what do you mean? I said, well, just substitute the word female. Say, all these females, she goes, oh, my goodness, that's offensive. I go, exactly. You're dropping everybody into the same bucket, and you have a data set of exactly two. I mean, that doesn't make any sense, right? You can't generalize like that, and I think that's where people get in trouble. Now, there's no question.
How did some of that start, though? I mean, is because I agree 100%. It's my experience with millennials, not just as a parent, but as somebody who's worked with hundreds and many thousands over the years.
Sure.
This is, to me, is one of the most impressive generations, right? I mean, I'm just in awe of the smarts and the energy and the drive and the willingness to work hard.
Sure.
That I see in the millennial generation. So, how did some of these generalizations sort of come to pass? Is it just because the parents and the boomers are sort of reflecting their own shortcomings onto the millennials?
No, I don't think so. I think the answer to this is fairly simple. And I tell you where it begins is boomers forget that when they came into the workplace, they were different too. I mean, whether you're late boomer or early Gen X, we were the people that, according to the old timers, we were a bunch of dope smokers and rock and rollers. And, all we cared about was, cruising town. And, I mean, we were different. And we forget that. It's really that all of that begins because boomers observe the new generation, the younger generation, the millennials, and they are different. They're different because of technology. They're different because they were raised with different sets of ideals and values. In many cases, they're raised in a different culture. So they come into the workplace with much different expectations, much different ideals about what's acceptable. And because many of them were always told, do what you want, explore yourself, there's no wrong answers, and they weren't allowed to fail because of helicopter parents. Hey, they come into the workplace with very different perspectives on life. And boomers seeing those things went, oh my gosh, these entitled brats, trophy generation, cupcakes. You can't say anything to them because they get their feelings hurt. A lot of that is true, but it doesn't make them bad people. It just makes them different in ways that if you just turn the page over, we're different to them, right? It's just that we just happen to be the ones in charge.
Yeah, it's sort of ironic when I think about it because, if millennials really understood, we talk about understanding each other, but I think one of the things that's missing from the millennial standpoint, and that's not a criticism, it's just maybe a criticism of the schools, is that this boomer generation, you go back to the 60s and the 70s, where people were really afraid this country was coming apart at the seams because, the protests in the streets and the anxiety about the war in Vietnam. And this was a generation that was, in many respects, sort of a very revolutionary generation.
Yeah, there's no question about it.
And now they're just seen as, well, they're the parents and they're sort of the old people, but sometimes kids need to go back and, we just had these, series of women's marches with, hundreds of thousands of people on the streets, but really for the first time almost since the late 60s, early 70s, where there's, these mass demonstrations of that was, the people they're working for now, the millennials are working for, these people are out protesting.
Yeah, absolutely right. And in that sense, they have a lot in common, don't they? I mean, they, both revolutionaries in that regard. But one of the big things is one of the biggest impacts, I think, is just for whatever reasons, societally and culturally and all that. I mean, the nuclear family changed dramatically. The definition of family changed dramatically. And a guy by the name of Benjamin Spock, taught an entire generation of parents that you don't need to discipline your kids. You're going to ruin them. You're going to teach them violence. You're going to do all this stuff. And so even inside the schools or inside the home, kids were raised much differently, like yourself. That's not a criticism. It's just an observation. When you look at the results of what you've got to walk your way backwards and see what the contributing factors are. And it's not that simple, but those are huge contributors. Ultimately, the point is, you have people that come into the workplace, they have much different ideas. It doesn't mean they can't be effective. They have much different techniques in terms of technology and so forth. Doesn't mean they can't be effective. And you've got a whole group of leaders who have been successful. And suddenly you've got a bunch of new faces coming in saying, hey, old guy, old geezer, hey, we know how to do it better than you do. And to them, that's completely disrespectful. And so what they do is they shut down and they quit learning and they won't listen to a different voice. And it creates all kinds of problems inside the workplace. So what we do, Andy, is say, hey, listen, what's the object? What's the objective of your leadership? Is it to win? Is it to be right? Is it to get over? Or is it to create a great company and great results? And when they go, well, it's just, to create great results. Well, then let's quit holding on to the way we've always done it and not invented here syndrome. And let's figure out how we can use the best of both worlds and become a better company. When it's framed that way, most people are like, okay, that makes sense. I mean, it's going to make my skin crawl in some instances, but yeah, I'm with you. Let's go do that.
But we're always talking about the fact that the boomers are in charge and the millennials are in the workforce. But as you said, the millennials now are in leadership. There's lots of companies where that exists. What are you seeing with the other way around, where millennials are in the leadership and you've got boomers that are in the workforce and trying to reconcile those differences?
Well, I got to tell you, that's the funniest thing in the world to me. I mean, it cracks me up to no end because you get a millennial, and I've mentored and coached Lots of them. But they all of a sudden, they've been that generation that the boss won't listen to me and the boss won't That's not new. I hate to tell them this, but we had the same problem.
Sure.
And leaders and employees have always had that dynamic. You've always had a group of micromanagers who wouldn't listen, do it my way, and it had nothing to do with your generation. It's a leadership problem. So suddenly they become leaders and they freak out. They can't believe, wow, my generation, I can't get them to do anything. And I'm like, are you listening to yourself? You're starting to find out what it's like to be a leader. It is way, way harder than you thought. And it really gets fun when they're managing boomers. And that's funny too. And boomers get a kick out of it too. Because I've actually run into a lot of boomers who really enjoy being led by younger, more enthusiastic, more passionate kids, they call them. And they get a kick out of it. And that's not always true, but I think it's really funny to watch a millennial move up into the level of management leadership and then suddenly realize it's not everything they thought it was cracked up to be. It's not that they want to give it up, but they realize it's way harder than they thought.
Well, which has always been the case, right? I mean, I think anybody moving up into management, that's been an issue, right? It always seems like looks easy from the outside, and once you get in there and you have to start managing people, and working.
Oh yeah, as I like to say, when you're an employee and you're a high performer, or you perceive yourself to be, you're always lamenting the fact that the boss won't let me do anything. Why didn't the boss just let me make these decisions and let me just do what I do? And then that person becomes a leader, and within 3 months they're like, you just can't find good people. It's amazing how the perspectives change when the responsibilities are thrown at you.
So listening to some of your podcast with Robbie is, one of the, conclusions, perhaps that may be too strong a word, but one of the sort of takeaways I have from his perspective is that this perception that, boomer managers are, sort of hypocritical, right? It's always about do as we say, not as we do.
Right.
I mean, is that sort of a common theme you see coming up?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of truth to it. Of course, he and I have a lot of fun, with our banter on the show. But the really interesting thing is if you just forget about generations and go look at the data and how many managers or leaders are considered to be effective, the numbers are pretty abysmal. You're talking about less than a third. Typically, 70% of employees when they leave an organization, according to Gallup and a whole other group of researchers, they're leaving because of the people they work for. I remember there was a Conference Board report some years ago in which one in three managers was considered to be an effective leader. The reality is, throw generations out, most leaders are just not very good. Now, it's a systemic issue from my perspective. We take people, we promote them to leadership, Andy. We don't train them. We don't say, listen, we promoted you because of your knowledge or skill or performance, but we want you to be a team leader and create team results and grow your people and all that. Instead, we just think, well, because you were good at it here, clearly you're going to be good at it as a leader, which is about the dumbest assumption ever, because it's two completely different set of skills. For example, in our world in sales, you can be a great salesperson, and typically we take the best salesperson and make them a manager. And then when they stink at it, we can't understand it. Well, it's because they never learned that set of skills. Leadership, as all the leadership gurus will tell you, is a set of skills that you can learn. Now, clearly, some leaders are better than others because it's sort of the art and science. There's skills to learn, but interpersonal skills and emotional intelligence and those things really will play into how effective you can be. But you can learn a set of skills that will make you an above average leader. But we don't do that in corporate America. We rarely train people when we elevate them to positions of management. So suddenly you get a bunch of people who don't know what they're doing in terms of leadership. Doesn't make them bad people, doesn't mean they're not competent, but they're just not very effective at developing teams. And suddenly they don't know what to do. So when they can't get people to do what they want, they become micromanagers. And many of them, they resort to that very quickly because that's what they grew up with. That's what they've seen. And now they sort of get it like, wow, like I was saying earlier, wow, you just can't find people who will do anything. And they get entrenched. And so millennials then, fast forward, come into this workplace and they see people who are very set in their ways. We've always done it this way. Hey, youngster, we've been successful. Why don't you sit down and, get a few years under your belt before you start telling us what to do? And that may be the first time they've ever heard anything like that. And it really sets them back quite a ways.
Well, and I think one of the things you're talking about, to my way of thinking, is that we may train managers how to manage, but we don't train them how to lead.
Exactly right. Exactly. Look at our world in sales. From where you and I come from on the sales side, management is what? CRM and it's budgeting and forecasting and it's reports and, it's product knowledge and all this. So we elevate a guy or a man or a woman to clearly into a leadership position, sales manager. And what do they focus on? CRM, budgeting, forecasting, and all that. But they forget that their role is now to develop a team of salespeople. So we didn't train them to do that, and they just think that because of their natural charisma, or their ability to get things done, or their drive, they'll just work harder and they'll be good at it. And it's just not true.
No, and you've written an article recently about this, really from the sales perspective, about difference between salesmen or scorekeepers and sales leaders. I guess was the distinction you made, being sort of the managers. We're sort of talking about basically just scorekeepers, right? We're going to manage activities. We're going to manage results from those activities, but we're not really focused on leading.
Correct. Well, you've had a good friend of mine, I'm sure a good friend of yours as well, on your show a couple of times, Mike Weinberg, and he and I have very, very similar philosophies about all this. I mean, if you've got sales leaders, I call them sales leaders instead of managers, because I think the leadership side is the more difficult part, oftentimes the part that's absent. But when your sales leaders are not trained to coach and teach and develop, and they're spending way more time doing administrative work and things that the C-suite level is, told them they have to do, and they're not out developing people, and they don't learn skills like how to create your own sales plans, and they don't understand how to create accountability and all that. I mean, it makes for a very difficult proposition, because the leaders become frustrated, the salespeople become frustrated, and then the C-suite becomes frustrated because we're not getting the results we want. And yet it's a system problem, and we're not fixing the system. And so we rinse and repeat. And everybody's heard that old definition of insanity, but that's what we're doing.
So, I mean, is there a fear, perhaps, that as we generate more and more data about our business operations, sales in particular, there's a lot more transparency in terms of the sales process and the tools that enable you to collect this data, that the natural tendency is to say, well, we've got this data, let's use it, but the way it's used is more as a command and control as opposed to a leadership function.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I like to say it's a pay me now or pay me later proposition. I mean, you're going to pay, right? So you can either choose to invest your money in developing your leaders and training your salespeople, or you will pay in missed quotas and turnover and everything else. So the challenge becomes that we have all this data, and so we try to manage by that data, and yet we're not addressing the things that would really make us better. But strengthening our leadership skills, strengthening our selling skills with our salespeople, and it becomes a significant issue because we're so reactive and in the moment, especially in the Fortune 500 world, in the public companies, it's earnings per share this quarter. So we can't even think long term many times, and it becomes a real challenge. But if you look at the way people think about training and development, what they'll often say, Andy, is when times are good and we're blowing and going, and man, we're just new product and great market and all that, and we're making a lot of sales. Well, we don't have time to train right now. We can't train right now. We just don't have time. I mean, we got to take care of this business. Well, then everything slows down. We go into a trough economically or some sort of slowdown or downturn. And now we can't train because we don't have the money. No, right now we just can't afford it. So suddenly we're never training because we have two built-in excuses. In one instance, we don't have the time. In another instance, we don't have the money. So when are we ever going to train? And so we just keep focusing on the data. Well, if you'd make more calls, and listen, the number of calls I make have nothing to do with, am I identifying the right business fit, the right opportunities, qualifying them effectively, and a dozen other factors that are really important. And all you're looking at is a number on a page that says how many calls per whatever I'm making. And that's not helpful because the sales leader is not training me in all of those other variables that are far more critical in converting opportunities. So you've just got a self-defeating system.
Yeah, it seems like it. Because, I mean, when we look at and get back to the issue of, this multi-generational workforces, the millennials are coming in to the sales force at a time where it is so data-oriented it does, to my mind, seem that there are too few managers that are really devoting the time they need to devote to coach and this one-on-one and develop, as opposed to just, let's just get their calls done. Let's, make this number of contacts and so on.
Well, I don't want to leave people with the wrong idea. I mean, some people may think, that I don't really advocate for numbers and data and analysis. Nothing could be further from the truth. I'm a data freak. The more information I have, from my perspective, the better it is for me as a sales leader. The real trick is to understand what the data is telling me and then be able to translate it into the coaching and training and development that will really impact those things. I mean, a really good example that I always like to use is you can have someone out there who is the national leader in sales. Okay, they're the top person, and so they get all the awards and they get all the accolades, and they have their annual performance review. And the sales manager, who is a numbers guy but not a coach or a trainer or developer or leader, he looks at him and says, "Man, you had a fantastic year, just incredible. But I was looking at your numbers, and I realized that your calls per week average is mediocre, and you're doing far less presentations than a third of our staff. Can you imagine what you would do if you could increase the number of calls you make?" And I'm like, oh my word. I mean, that's the entire point. You think there's a clear and defined link between number of calls per, number of presentations per to results. And clearly this guy just blew up that whole idea. And instead of changing the way you think about it and understanding there is a different connection, you're just locked into this old paradigm, and it's just killing salespeople.
Well, I think it is. I think one of the things that I see is that's different these days is, and again, not placing a judgment on it necessarily, but I don't see, at least when I was started, is we had more freedom as salespeople. I mean, we had a process, we had methodologies we got trained in and so on, but at least the people I worked for, and I worked some big companies, is they really wanted us to come to an understanding pretty quickly through repetition about what really works for us. Right. And I sort of see this individual aspect of selling sort of being pushed into the corner a little bit. And I think that's where the real strength, that's where we really tap into the strength of the individuals, is saying, okay, well, we may have a process, we may have expectations for calls and so on, but this guy's just killing it. And they're not making the same number of calls, and that's okay.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I'm jealous. I grew up in an environment where I was in a smaller company, and we didn't have any real training. Nobody taught me a sales process. I had to go out and find it in, from the books of the masters out there, and sort of incorporate it into what I did. But I'll never forget when I became a sales manager, and I had a guy come to me and he said, "Listen, I want to ask you, do you mind if I play golf a couple of times a week?" And I said, well, I mean, listen, here's my philosophy. If you hit your numbers, I really don't care what you do, as long as it's legal and ethical and moral, but do you mind if I ask why? And he said, well, yeah. He says, a lot of my doctors, I was in the medical business. Mm-hmm. He said, a lot of my doctors, I can't get to them in the OR. I can't get to them in the clinic because they're too busy. But, I've got connections, and they're playing golf, and a lot of them are, country club guys and that kind of thing. And I'm a big golfer, and I think I can connect. And I said, listen, your methodology is up to you. Just remember, if you don't hit your numbers, you have to justify why you're on a golf course. And so he went out, and he was the number 2 guy in the country. But I would never tell all of my other salespeople, okay, change of plan. Here's what we're doing. From now on, we're all going to play golf twice a week.
Right. That
would be as stupid as saying, hey, we're all going to make X number of calls per week. In the sports world, when you're coaching an athlete, not every athlete has the same talents and skills and so forth. So you can take 2 wide receivers. One's 6'4", 220, and he's got a certain set of skills. And another one is 5'10", runs 4.3, and has a different set of skills. You coach them differently with the same objective in mind. I think leading people is like that. You have to assess their skills, where they excel, what they do well, and tailor those into that general sales process that you have. But the problem is I saw it was we didn't have a sales process. I mean, you had too many people out there just going in 100 directions, and they didn't have any guidance whatsoever.
Well, yeah, we're going to wrap up here, but I think that was a great phrase to wrap up with, which is you coach people differently, but with the same goal in mind. And yes. I think this is where too many sales teams are really restricting their upside, is by being so focused on the process that they're not unleashing the power of the individual to go out and succeed to the way they can.
Well, that's because we've never done it that way here, Andy.
There you go.
And there you have the millennial perception of the world of boomer managers.
Exactly. All right. Kelly, great as always to talk with you. So tell folks how they can find out more about you, talk about Counter Mentors, your great podcast you're doing with your son.
I appreciate that. You can find us and our podcast at countermentors.com. You'll see a mention of the book that's coming. All of my work in my organization is bizlockerroom.com, and that's where you can find all the stuff that I write with regards to sales and leadership and so forth. Welcome to have you.
All right, great. Kelly, thanks again. And friends, thank you for spending this time with us today. Come back, join me again tomorrow. And until then, I'd really appreciate if you take a second, go to iTunes, subscribe to this podcast, Accelerate, leave a review. We want to hear what you think, what we're doing well, what we could do better, to provide more value to you. So thanks again for joining me. Until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.